Notebook on Cities and Culture's Korea Tour is brought to you by Daniel Murphy, David Hayes, and Polar Inertia Journal, an outlet for artists and researchers documenting the urban condition at polarinertia.com. Seeing you on television before, I remember hearing you describe the amazement you felt first seeing Seoul when you first got here. When was that, and how amazing was it? Why was it amazing?
Let's see, that was 1995. I came in December of 1995, and, you know, the world gets more and more similar all the time, but it wasn't as similar as it is now. So back then, when I first arrived in Korea, it was a very, very different place. I mean, it was like arriving in I don't want to say third world nation, but it wasn't like America. It was not nearly as developed. Many things were bizarre, such as every single car was a Korean brand.
Yes.
Like every car on the street, it would be bizarre when you would, for a minute, you would see, some other brand. And I'm trying to think of some other brand, but I don't remember any other brands, to tell you the truth.
Hyundais, Kias, Daewoo's all around?
That was it. Sangyong, that was it. There was no foreign cars at the time. So I remember being just, oh my God, that's bizarre. Now, of course, there's foreign cars everywhere. And the people's attitudes were very different. Of course, there's the bumping and things like that you had to get used to. A little bit of the spitting on the sidewalk here and there. But in general, people were very friendly and accommodating. There, especially back then, there wasn't many foreign faces around. So when I was around, people always were a little surprised and shocked, and
just to see you standing there.
I don't want to say just standing there, but it was you got more attention being a foreigner than you do now, and many people I would bump into or meet had never met a foreigner before in their lives.
And would react how?
I don't know. They would just every person was different, but they were mostly it was like, wow, this is pretty interesting. And then especially once I learned Korean, and a lot of people would say, well, this is the first time I ever talked to a foreigner in my life. And yeah, okay, cool. So, it was I'm kind of glad I showed up when I did. I feel actually, when I did show up, I constantly was saying to myself, geez, I wish I'd have shown up 10 years earlier.
Oh, yes?
Yeah, I wish I'd have seen Korea, 10 years ago. But now, of course, 20 years later, I go, thank goodness I got to see Korea 20 years ago and be. So now I feel like, yeah, I'm really glad I came when I did. At the time, I guess I wish I'd have come in when I was 14 or something. But but arriving at 24 and being able to see Korea the way it was then and all the changes it's been a pretty amazing way to spend my life. Yeah.
This is Notebook on Cities and Culture, coming to you from this much modernized Seoul, Korea, speaking with Stephen Revere, who is, well, right now he is full force as the CEO of 10 Media, the publisher of 10 Magazine, a very cool magazine in English about Seoul, about what goes on here, and about other parts of Korea, too. I think I've read about more than Seoul. I've kept up online with 10 as a way to sort of get my mind into Seoul before I came here. And as well, I've been following his older work because he's done a lot of Korean teaching. Many of you will probably know, if you've stumbled upon this interview, you'll know him from the Let's Speak Korean TV series on Arirang Television, now with hundreds of episodes available on YouTube because people keep putting them up. So you know him as a publisher, you know him as a teacher. If you're into Korea, you probably know Stephen Revere as one or two of those things, or both. Now tell me, how long was it from this moment when you were amazed at Seoul, when you just showed up, to when you were full on in terms of learning and teaching the Korean language?
Well, I came planning on learning Korean. So as soon as I got here, I was trying to do all I could to study.
You came as a student of the Korean language, like, I want to come learn this language.
Yeah, I came as an English teacher, as far as career and earnings goes, but I also was at the time I was also trying very hard to learn Korean. So at the time, this is back in cassette tapes days, and there was a dearth of Korean language education materials. There wasn't that many people studying Korean, so of course there wasn't that much Korean language education materials. So there were a few things, and there was only one. Like, for me, listening is crucial to learning the language, and I would just spend I did most of my learning just listening to the same cassette tapes a million times over. But there were so few cassette tapes at the time, so few resources. Think about it, pre-internet days. Now you could find anything, but at the time it was just brutally difficult to find stuff. So I remember I think they're still for sale, Korean through English.
I checked those out of the library when I first started. It was hit and miss, those materials.
Yeah, but it was all there was at the time. So I thought it was the best stuff going.
At least it's through English, hell.
Yeah, and I could listen. It actually annoyed me a little bit because they had the English translations in between. So, I had to fast forward through all that. Of course, they were helpful the first time around or the second time around. But if you really want to get an ear for the language, you have to be listening just to that language, and so I'd have to fast forward through all the English parts. So my book, of course, has no English translations, except, of course, in the book you can read the book and figure out what they're saying, but they're not translated in English, so that you can just listen to the tapes, the CDs now, again and again and again. So yeah, I just focused on studying the language as soon as I got here, and it's a hard language.
You could hardly get a more dissimilar language to English than Korean, could you?
Yeah, the Defense Language Institute of the DoD. How they separated the languages? They put them in
4 categories.
Yes.
For the listener who doesn't know, how does that work?
Well, they put almost every language in 4 different degrees of difficulty. And the easiest ones for an English speaker, this is the Defense Language Institute in Monterey, part of the Department of Defense. And they put, Spanish and Italian and languages like this in the first category, Category 1. And they say that it takes about 780 hours of study to become fluent in one of those languages. Whereas in the Category 4 languages, which includes Chinese, Russian, Korean, to become fluent in one of those languages, it takes 2,200 to 2,400 hours.
That's quite a jump up.
Yeah, so you're talking about 3 times as hard, right?
And it sounds like a low hour count to me, honestly. Like, I feel like I'm going to spend more time before I get to a level I'm comfortable with.
Yeah, it's hard.
Why is Korean so hard?
Again, it's been so long that a new speaker such as yourself would be a better person to ask. But the word order is completely different. The vocabulary has no relation whatsoever to anything we know. Of course, that's changed a lot because so many words from English have worked their way into Korean. Right?
There's much Konglishi.
Yeah. So those English cognates that have worked their way in the Korean language make it a little bit easier, I think, for people starting now. But other than that, I would sit in class and my teacher they had a strict rule of not using your language to teach, right? We wouldn't speak any English. Oh, you can't speak English class, can't speak Japanese, can't speak Chinese, and I always thought that was a little lame, especially when there would be an obstacle where we can't really understand the word. Just give me the English word, and they would know it, but they would refuse to say it. And but at the same time, they would write up Chinese characters all the time. So they write up this Chinese character, and the Japanese person next to me goes, "Oh," and I'm like, "That's cheating. You're gonna teach them using their language, but you won't teach me." So that Japanese and Chinese have the word origins from Chinese, so they have a serious advantage in trying to learn the language, whereas as a native English speaker, you don't.
I remember hearing you talk about that situation on an episode of Let's Speak Korean, maybe more than one. And I think to myself, I've never really considered quitting studying Korean. From the moment I started, it's just been like, well, ahead as fast as I can with what I can, partially because there were materials like Let's Speak Korean that I found. So how did you get involved with this television show? It went for hundreds of episodes.
Well, I think I still am, although I'm not sure, I'll always be the first Westerner to get a master's in teaching Korean as a second language.
잘하셨어요.
Thank you. So, by getting that degree, at the time they were looking for someone to teach it, and I had done some other television before, and somehow, I think that's what it was. They went to Seoul National University and said, we're looking for someone, perhaps a native English speaker, to teach Korean. And then the teachers at Seoul National University knew me and knew of me and knew that I had done some television before and said, well, you should talk to Steve Revere. And then I think I had just graduated. You know what? You're right. It was 2004 because I had just graduated with my master's, I think. And so
on the show, you talk about being in grad school or finishing up grad school. During the actual episode, you're like, I just got done with this test. I'm going to go celebrate. I just finished turning in my dissertation or what have you.
Well, that means it's 10 years ago.
Yeah. Wow.
10 years ago, right?
Time flies.
Yeah, it's amazing. So those are 10-year-old episodes now. And, I was really lucky that I had that opportunity. And then when I got done with that, I was able to write the Korean language textbooks. I've published 2 textbooks, too. And
Survival Korean grammar skills.
Yep. Survival Korean, I think, basic grammar skills. Yeah.
Well, of which there is a demand for new editions on both of those.
Yeah, it's about that time. Those are going on 10 years, too. So I guess they're about 8 years old. So I would love to get time to have another whack at them, update them. You know, at the time I'm writing about DVD bang and all this stuff that's really, Korea's so different now from what I was talking about then.
Right. Going through these episodes and learning, I remember they always had a standard form, and there were always 4 people on. There was you, and then there was the other host, Lisa Kelly. I was never totally sure what her role was. I guess it was because she was perfectly bilingual. She could sort of say both. I don't know, but in any case, she was there, but mainly it was you teaching and 2 students. And the students came you switched around, you rotated, and they were from all different places, and tell me if you felt this too, but I was embarrassed always because the American dudes always seemed to be the worst in terms of their language skills. Do you think that was true?
No, I mean, I don't know. We had students on that show who were better at Korean than I was, pretending to not speak Korean.
Really? I mean, where'd you get them? Where were these people from?
There was 2 of the students were Italian young ladies who had grown up in
sisters?
Korea. Yeah.
Oh, they grew up in Korea.
They had grown up in Korea, so their Korean language abilities were better than mine.
So when they said something, and when what were the Miriam and Naomi said something in crappy Korean, that was just fake. They were just acting like they couldn't speak.
Yes, they were pretending not to. This is one of the things that Yeonchul in Korea is a very big thing. People pretending to do stuff on television. It always drove me nuts, but we still had to do it. So their language ability was amazing. And I don't remember. I mean, if they were the worst, I'll tell you, I was the worst in my class too. Really? But my class was full of Japanese, Chinese, Vietnamese people who had a little bit of a background to it. I was the steady guy who barely eked out 70% was what it took to pass the class. But it was unfair. I mean, they're starting from a different level, right. And I can guarantee you that I speak better than any of them now.
Yes.
But it took a lot of time and diligence, yes. And life is a sprint. It's not a sprint; it's a marathon. So,
what prize were your eyes on when you were enduring this sort of getting the lowest score, seeing everybody else know Chinese characters and just get a jump because of where they grew up? What were you looking toward? If it was like, one day I'll have this because I can speak this language.
I don't know. I just didn't.
Same answer I have when I get asked that.
It's hard to say. I didn't someday. I think I just enjoy learning. I think is what it comes down to. I just my grades didn't matter to me nearly as much as having fun learning. I loved going to class with a bunch of Japanese people who I couldn't speak to in their language, and they couldn't speak to me in my language, and yet we'd still sit around and have fun and communicate and with such an international crowd. In fact, there was a time where I was doing a group called we called it Hanwemo, which is a double entendre. It means pretty good looking. Wemo is like appearance, so Hanwemo is like someone who's pretty good looking. And then, it was called the Hangulmal Hanen Waegugin Moim. So it was a group of people from all over the world who spoke Korean, and we would all get together and we would all speak Korean, and we'd get together once a month or something and just sit around and drink and eat and chat, and it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed that group and running that group.
It's the kind of strategy you recommended on the show. I'll just go out and do stuff as a means of learning. I mean, now you run a magazine, which is all about stuff you can go out and do. Has that always been something you've advocated for? Just go out and do stuff?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, the getting out and having the opportunity to do it is the best way to learn. Although, of course, you got to put some training wheels on. Right. I'm becoming more and more of a fan of who wrote the 4-Hour Workweek. What's that guy?
Tim Ferriss.
Tim Ferriss. I like Tim Ferriss's concepts of boiling things down to very simple stages of learning. And making sure you execute those stages in the proper order.
Yes, and breaking it down to doable parts. That itself is kind of a fun process, isn't it?
Yeah. So I mean, that's essential. Jumping in and doing something that's way above your level is not going to get you there nearly as quickly as spending your time taking it piece by piece. But anyway, I found that learning was a blast, and of course communication. Every little step of extra communication was fun. You
can always tell you're getting better when you're getting better, because you're out there and you're feeling a little bit easier about everything, and you can do more. Your abilities grow in life.
Yeah. So I think rather than my eyes on a big prize, I just spent my time doing what I enjoyed, and I certainly did. The opportunity that I had to take classes I did 4 10-week sessions at Seoul National University, studying 20 hours a week, 4 hours a day, 20 hours a week, and that was fun. I mean, that was good fun, and I look back at those study sessions, those semesters that I spent studying, as some of the funnest times I ever spent.
What were some of the fun things about just the Korean lifestyle, to put it that way, that made you think this was a good place to live, or a good sort of people to be among? What were you really enjoying early about Korean life?
Back then, in particular, what did I enjoy? I had a lot of fun sitting around having good times with friends. The food here was especially back then was pretty cheap. Yes. You could go out and have some, and at the time my head could take soju, but
no more.
I know I'm done with soju for this lifetime. I still, on the rare occasion, I'll have a glass with barbecue or something, but yeah, I just had a lot of fun hanging out with people, and of course they enjoyed a lot of Korean people enjoyed the opportunity to be able to meet and speak to a foreigner and talk about the differences and the similarities in life, and it was just fun. And of course there was a lot of job opportunities. I was very lucky that I was able to continually stay here, mostly teaching English, right? So it would have been, if I hadn't had those job opportunities teaching English, it would have been hard for me to stay here as long as I did. I probably would have had to return at some point. So it was a combination of the opportunities and the fun that was available to be had.
How early did you have the idea of a magazine about fun stuff like 10? Was that this sort of germ from the beginning? You're like, could I do this? Or was it more recent than that, launched in 2008, correct?
Yeah.
So was it an idea that came to you just before that, or was it a long brewing sort of notion for you?
First off, I've always loved magazines. I've always subscribed to 321 Contact when I was a little kid, which probably hardly anybody remembers. And I subscribed to U.S. News and World Report when I was back home. I subscribed to The Nation magazine for quite a while. I subscribed to all kinds of magazines. I've always enjoyed subscribing to magazines. I like when that thing comes in the mail and you break it out and there's all kinds. So I think that certainly had an influence. I was working on another business with someone else, and we started a much smaller magazine for a little while, and then I moved on from that, and I decided that there was a market. I had seen events listings style magazines in more countries as I learned more about the situation, the English magazine situation in Asia, and in Beijing and Shanghai there was one called That's Magazine, and in Tokyo there was one called Metropolis. In Hong Kong there's one called HK Magazine, and Singapore's got its magazine. So there was all these magazines that did a lot to help native English speakers enjoy the place that they were at, and I really felt like the market, I mean, we're still the only one that focuses on events listings.
So from that core, you go outward. It's events listings at its core, and then you build upon that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you noticed this, but we flip the magazine now. We kind of have two covers.
I see.
We have two front covers, and so the one section is, the one half of the magazine is the guide section, which lists everything going on all over the country: Seoul, concerts, festivals, parties, nightlife, dining things, wine tastings, everything you can go do and enjoy all over the country. So it really, I've talked to a lot of foreigners and expats who say, yeah, I really enjoy your magazine, and I really enjoy that it's not just about Seoul.
Right. The whole country.
Yeah, that it talks about other places in the country to go visit and do, especially because this is the easiest place in the world to get around the country.
Easiest. I mean, I've noticed that going to Busan on the KTX, I hear it's going to be faster in like a few months too, which is unbelievable.
Yeah, but even you ride the KTX and you get there really fast. That's nice. But even before the KTX, I mean, yeah, you had to ride for 4 hours, but you ride for 4 hours, you arrive, there's buses going everywhere, there's taxis going everywhere. You do not need to have a car of your own to get around at all.
Yeah, I'm amazed anybody in Seoul drives, specifically Seoul, but other major cities as well.
Yeah, other than for your job, there's a lot of people who have jobs where they got to get around to a lot of places, but yeah, I ride my bicycle everywhere, so I love it.
What is especially hard, besides the language, for a foreigner, for an expat to understand about really enjoying Seoul? What kinds of things do they need to know before they can really make full use of a city like this, or indeed of a country like Korea?
Simply learning the Korean written language, Hangul. If you can learn the writing system, you're halfway to learning to work your way around the city, because a lot of the stuff is in English, which I'm sure you're noticing right now. If you can read Korean, you go around and you see bus, right, which is bus, and all these other words that are in Korean in theory, but they're actually English words that have come into Korean, right?
I often stumble over them when I'm trying to read a book or whatever. Like, what could this word be? What's an otobai? I say, oh, it's a motorcycle.
Yeah. So that sort of thing, if you can, and the Hangul is one of the easiest. There's 24 letters. They generally almost always have a single sound, so it's really easy to read. So if you were going to spend a lengthy period of time in Korea, I would recommend learning that to start, and then getting a subscription to 10 magazine.
Yes,
learning how to tell the taxi drivers to turn right, left, and go straight.
Yeah, because it's different words than normal.
Yeah, and that's really
from there you can go on from there.
Yeah. It's a hidden gem. Korea is an incredibly fun place to travel, reasonably priced, and like I said, you can get around everywhere. I don't know why, but because of the language difficulties, I think it's still a relatively unknown place to travel. And
even in this era of K-pop, K-drama, movies, the Korean wave, so they say, you'd still call it a bit of a hidden gem?
Well, that's changing. The Korean tourism has almost doubled in the last 5 years. Went from about 6 million visitors to 12 million. But yeah, I'd still say as far as, comparing it to other places in Asia, like the number of people visiting Beijing or Tokyo or even Cambodia or Bangkok for that matter, I mean, there's just going to be way more tourists and people checking that out, and then people just don't visit the nooks and crannies and the corners and other cities in Korea either.
Right, it's the other cities, that's long fascinated me, because I have a lot of Korean friends I make in Los Angeles, for example, and if they come from someplace other than Seoul, I ask, what's your hometown like? I meet a lot of Busan saram there, and they say, like, oh, it's not Seoul, forget it. And I was like, but there's 5 million people in your hometown. I've seen pictures. It's got this giant beach and skyscrapers and stuff. I'm like, no, forget it. Jibang, forget it. What is that?
Jibang means the boonies, right?
Which is everywhere but Seoul in their mind.
Seoul, that's right. Yeah, I don't know. It's small countries have a tendency to have a massive focal point for everything. I know Britain, London just dwarfs the rest of the entire country on scale, and I know that happens here. Like, everybody thinks everything is happening in Seoul, and there is just, strictly because of the population, there is just massively more things happening here. But there's some beautiful places and fun places and great food and great times to experience in the other areas, but Koreans have a unique tendency to think that what they're up to is not that big a deal, and it's kind of not. It's no big deal. Why would you bother? And yeah, it's funny.
What do you tend to do when you go to these other cities out in the Jibang, as they say? What tends to bring you out there?
I love markets. I love visiting some of the seafood markets that they have right on the coast. It's so fun when you can just go get some fresh seafood that was just caught and brought in. They also have what's called oil jangto. Have you been to one of those yet? They're markets that take place every 5 days, and so it'll generally be based on the numbers of the week. So this is like a tradition going back centuries, of course. So they would have their market on the 2nd, 7th, 12th, 17th, 22nd, and 27th, right? So everything with a 2 and a 7 in it, of course, not a 2 like starting with a 2, but anything that ended with a 2 or a 7 would be the day that the market would happen. So there's a lot of those that still go on in the remote regions of Korea, and that is where you can really see some of the traditional Korean lifestyle and get some of the freshest fruits and vegetables, and it's like a farmer's market almost,
Can you do the regional dialects, the saturi?
No.
You can understand them though, right? I'm still having trouble with some of them.
No, most people, nobody from Seoul can understand somebody from Jeju-do.
Yeah, I hear that mainly about Jeju-do. Forget that one. The other ones though, you can kind of come to grips with, right?
Yeah, some of them are just turned into accents more than dialects. And however, the grandmothers and grandfathers who speak them really strongly, it gets closer to dialect, but they're more just accents nowadays. And there's a few words that are different, but they're used for comedy sketches more than anything.
It gets at the generational difference here. Much is said about the generational divide, the generation gap, and it's in more than language, isn't it? There's quite a few differences between older and younger people here, are there not?
Well, yeah. We got yes, massive differences. The older people they barely got cell phones. They really are the people who do the 3D jobs around here. You see anybody cleaning up anything, generally it's an older person. So yeah, all the dirty, difficult jobs are done by old people here, which is why this country's in for a big reckoning in the next 5 to 10 years. I don't know who's going to clean up the trash when these people start passing away, and Korea still keeps saying we don't want foreigners. Koreans aren't having enough kids. Well, if Koreans aren't having enough kids, and somebody's got to clean up the garbage, then you got to bring in foreigners somehow. There's all the factories are still have tons of foreigners working them because Koreans generally don't want the jobs at the rates that they're paid, of course.
So why don't they want the foreigners?
They still, there's definitely, this is historically a single ethnicity, single race country. And there's a traditional outlook on things that you're a foreigner no matter what. I mean, if you're not a Korean born, if you're not, where you're born actually doesn't even matter. You're Korean inherently by race, right? Asia itself sees race as much more of a factor in your inherent nationality than anything that we can fathom. I mean, I don't know if, I assume you know this, but many of your listeners might not, that people can be born and live their entire lives in Japan but not be Japanese, right? Yes. I still remember learning that from one of my classmates when she goes, "Yeah, I was born in Japan, but I'm not Japanese." And I said, "How can you? You can't speak Korean." She said, "Yeah, but I'm Korean." And I'm like, "But you can't speak the language at all. How can you be considered Korean?" "Well, no, I am because I'm not Japanese and I got a Korean passport." How does Korea hand out passports to people who have never been to their country before? It's a race-based thing. So people are still basing nationality on race in Asia to a degree that we have trouble fathoming.
It's true. I feel like I was surprised the first time I heard that not all countries, like America does, gives you the nationality because you were born there. I just assumed, I didn't think every country did it, but I thought it was more widespread than in just America. I mean, you've said elsewhere about how your life in Korea has given you a perspective on America. What has it taught you about our homeland?
It certainly taught me that I like the safety here. I don't like the lack of safety that exists in America. I love the friendliness of Americans. I love saying hi to people I don't know, and in Korea that doesn't happen generally. You say hi to somebody you don't know, they look at you like you're nuts. So I very much miss that about America and love it, and have grown to really appreciate that. At the same time, nobody says, "Hey, what are you looking at?" when you're out at some bar hanging out having a good time. Yeah, so the stupid fights that occur in the U.S. that just don't happen here, I really appreciate. The complete lack of firearms is nice. Sure. Being able to, I will say stuff and get in arguments with people, knowing full well that nobody's got a gun, and they know I don't have a gun. None of us is gonna, and we'll shout and yell at each other. I think to a degree that it's something that you have to kind of funny, but you have to kind of appreciate that you can be more direct and honest.
So how often are you getting into these shouting matches?
Whenever necessary.
What are they about?
Whenever necessary. Well, I'll tell you, I sold my motorcycle because I hated driving on the streets and wanted to punch somebody every time I drove here. Driving in Korea is just, I think taxi drivers in Korea have some of the hardest jobs there are, because
what's the story with the behavior on the roads here? I mean, I've never driven in Korea. I've driven in America a bit, but I'm used to the way Americans have thoroughly internalized certain rules of the road. What is it like here?
Okay. You haven't ridden around much here? I mean,
I've never driven a car here. I've been in a taxi.
Yeah. Especially motorcycles in particular, they tend, people in cars, okay, the bigger your vehicle, the more right of way it has.
I see.
So a bus is allowed to cut people off almost any time it wants, and then the next step down is a vehicle that operates as a business. So taxis are allowed to cut everybody off, and you have to kind of expect that taxis are going to be driving like, some taxis drive like madmen, some are normal and rational, but and then people will just, if they don't know which way they're going to go, sometimes they'll just stop in the middle of traffic
and then decide.
Yeah, it's like, oh geez, I don't know which way I'm going to go. And where I come from, you pick one, you go, and if it's wrong, you go up and you turn around and you come back.
Orange County has rules about this.
Yeah, exactly. When they stop and everybody has to stop in traffic, this guy's illegally parked right here. right behind us so that he can drop off some stuff. It gets old. I very much learned to appreciate the driving system. And
yeah, it's something I didn't realize in America. People really have internalized driving. It's not something that's automatic when cars come to a country. It's a whole different game you play in America versus in other countries when driving, it seems.
Yeah, and Korea, I must say, has gotten better. It used to be a lot worse than it is now, but it still has a long way to go.
We're here in Itaewon, where 10 Magazine is headquartered. What is the role of Itaewon in Seoul? How is it different from other places?
Itaewon is very unique in the world. If you go over here, you see that fire station?
Oh, okay.
Now, sometimes people take this the wrong way, but this is the most eclectic place in the world. If you go to that fire station and you go up that street, the first street is called Hooker Hill.
Sure. I've heard of Hooker Hill.
Okay, the second street is called Homo Hill.
Sure.
The third street leads up to that mosque at the top of the hill. Mm-hmm. So all of the unique, misfit, different people in Korea have congregated to a massive extent in Itaewon.
Really? Because there were some at first, and then they all joined. It's like an immigrant community anywhere. It's the first few get there, and then the rest say, "Well, that's like I can join them."
Yeah, except that the immigrant communities tend to separate into different immigrant communities,
True.
And there has been so few foreigners in Korea that all the immigrants just congregated in the same place. So there's Indian guys who run businesses up this street over here, and there's all kinds of great Indian restaurants and cater to all the Indian people. There's Turkish people in our building who run Turkish restaurants. There's a Moroccan guy down the street. I mean, people just from all over the world who live in Korea end up congregating in Itaewon to a massive extent. I have no idea how that mosque ended up being right in the middle of Itaewon, but it's right in the middle of Itaewon.
It somehow fits.
There you go, and it does. And there's a lot of Islamic people walking around who are, and this is where homosexuality is most accepted in Korea, and the rest of the country really there's no equivalent to Homo Hill anywhere else in Korea that I know of. There's a few bars in other areas, but no place that they congregate on to a large extent. And so it's a very open-minded, have you heard of the song Itaewon Freedom?
I don't think I've heard that song.
Okay, Google it.
Yes, I will.
There's a fun Korean song called Itaewon Freedom, and it's about the freedom that Koreans feel to not have to fit into the Korean mold when they visit Itaewon.
So it's about how Koreans feel when they come here.
Yeah.
And it's like an exciting place for Koreans to go, like, it's the whole world here in Korea. I can go there and not feel like I'm in Korea anymore.
Kinda, yeah. I mean, it's still Korea, but it's still it's their best chance to experience authentic nations of it's their own little Epcot Center.
Right, exactly. And I hear it's come a long way. Itaewon has. I mean, tell me, what was it like the almost 20 years ago you got here? What was the Itaewon of the 90s?
Well, that was where the military hung out from the army base, and I mean, we would come here because we could watch videos in English with English language. It's hard to fathom a time when you couldn't check out YouTube, but at the time, God, to be able to watch an English language movie was awesome. So once a month or so, I would come, and there was a bar called Nashville, which is gone now, and we'd go in the basement and watch whatever movie they had playing that day. And that was a great chance to enjoy a Western movie.
How many different places have you lived in Seoul over these years?
I never counted. Probably
countless, I guess.
Yeah, 15 maybe. I moved a lot, especially as an English teacher. If you change jobs, you pretty much had to move out of whatever housing they might have been offering and into some
always
other.
living at the school housing.
Kinda, generally.
What is your neighborhood of choice now then? If you're just thinking of going to a cool neighborhood, if you're recommending somebody a neighborhood to live in, where do you say if they're just coming from the outside world or America or whatever? What do you rattle off now as well? These are kind of neat areas these days.
Well, everybody's different. The people who want to live in something, very. Hongdae is, that's a hot area. I lived there for 5 years. That was fun. It's a great place to go visit and live in. There's tons of culture there. It's where the country's #1 art university is, so there's a lot of artists there, a lot of great live music there. If you want to be able to speak English as much as possible, you'd pick Itaewon or the Haebangchon Gyeongnidan area.
And if you want to speak the most Korean as possible for practice?
Chungcheongdo. Sure. Get out of Seoul. Anywhere out of Seoul, and you'll end up speaking nothing but Korean. So, yeah.
Now, those Korean friends you were making early on when you were really throwing yourself into the language and hanging out with them, are any still friends today? Do you keep up with people you knew right at the beginning of your life in Korea?
A little bit, not much. No, for the most part, it's over the years you lose contact, just like you do. I mean, my classmates from grad school, started grad school with them 12, 15 years ago, so I still keep in touch with all of them. And that's about it. No, I don't keep in touch with a lot of the friends from the first year I was here.
No, I see.
Yeah.
Now, the people who see you on Let's Speak Korean still, it's still it's still the first hit when people are learning Korean, looking for resources. Do many people get in touch with you as a result of having seen you on those shows still you did a decade ago?
Yeah, I actually made a Facebook page because it was weird having them friend me on Facebook, but it's really cool to have them, appreciate what I've done, and every once in a great while, I'll be sitting around with somebody, and some guy I was sitting around with a friend having coffee in Samsung-dong last week, and some guy walks by and stares at me as he's going by, and then he stares at me as he's going by again, and then he walks by and he looks and goes, "Stephen Revere, I like your books." Oh, great, I'm glad to hear it. So it's a fun, unique thing to be well known for, and I really, I'm a lucky guy. I enjoy that. I really enjoy it.
And because of that type of feedback, do you ever think, maybe it's time to do some more Korean teaching-related activities? You've been going full speed ahead on 10 Magazine. Do you foresee a future where you can do more Korean instruction-related activities?
Yeah, I would need more free time. I have to focus so much on, as an entrepreneur, you put in the 50, 60, 70-hour work weeks. And I have a brand new daughter who's 3 months old. Yeah. So, maybe if, some awesome, I'm working on all kinds of new things to help the revenue, bring more revenue into the magazine. Hopefully we'll get to where, we're at a steady pace and I don't have to work as hard. But until that happens, I got to focus on my company.
At what point did you realize that you would be leading a life at the scale of, almost 20 years and counting in Korea? When did you know you were really in it for a long term?
I told my mother I was going back every year until the 8th year. And at the 8th year, I said, "Yeah, Ma, I guess I'm not." And she kind of went, "Yeah, whatever, you're not."
Did you ever seriously plan to return when you were saying that, or were you just like, "Well, I'll say this and maybe it will soften the idea"?
I always thought I was going to go back the next year.
Really?
Yeah, for the first 8 years. Nobody shows up thinking they're going to stay for 20 years. Nobody. Everybody shows up thinking I'll be gone next year. And then occasionally you extend another year, and then you extend another year, and then maybe eventually you go, all right, maybe I'll just stay.
What kept you extending year by year? What was the sort of thing that you said, well, I've got this going on, I've got that going on, this is something I want to see how it plays out? What were the things that kept you going through those first 8 extensions, shall we say?
Well, the first 3 years it was just not being at a Korean level that I wanted to be at.
Right.
I wanted to be totally fluent, and so the first 3 years I was like, but then after the 3 years I was pretty happy with my Korean level fluency. And then other opportunities came up. I got the opportunity to do some TV shows. I got the opportunity to become a university professor in '98. And just opportunities like that just kind of ended up keeping me here for a few more years. And then, like I said, then 8 years rolled around. It's like, all right, I don't know if I'm ever leaving.
And once you're fluent in Korean, it's sort of like, why would you, if your goal was fluency in Korean, why would you then leave? That seems like the opposite of what you'd want to do.
Yeah, it's kind of it kind of suckered me.
Yeah.
I thought I was going to show up and be fluent in 6 months and then go learn some other language. Well, you can't be fluent in 6 months in Korean. Just give up on it. So that ends up taking me 3 years, and then after 3 years, you've got a base, you've got friends, you've got a job that you might be happy with or whatever, and then you're like, okay, well, I'll stick it out another year, and you're saving money or whatever, and then you just get hooked.
What are the things you found yourself doing where you realized, I must be fluent in Korean now? The sort of situations or things you could do where you thought, well, I guess I've attained fluency.
I don't know. Fluency just means you're speaking quickly. Really, people misunderstand fluency for meaning that you speak perfectly. And fluency just means you're speaking quickly. So, I mean, there's just different stages. There's different levels of success as you're going along, right? I still remember sitting in a taxi and actually using past tense, talking about my weekend for the first time, going, wow, I did that right. Just gradually getting to where I could carry on higher and higher level conversations and be more speedy and fluent. So
there was something you reminded viewers of on Let's Speak Korean. You would say, no matter how hard Korean is, English is harder. Do you think that's true? It is an objectively sort of harder language to learn, English, than Korean?
No, I don't think I said that. Did I say that?
Harder is maybe not the word you used. It was more like English is weirder. It's like more filled with exceptions. Like, don't worry about these Korean exceptions, because English, I think you would reference your own teaching of it that you've done, and like, I've taught it. It's harder to get this across than it is to get the Korean stuff across.
In certain aspects, that's true. For instance, irregular verbs. There is a ton of irregular verbs in English, and when you think, I have to memorize every single irregular verb to do this, it's much harder, and I think what you're referring to is irregular verbs Korean style, which simply means that there's a different rule for this set of verbs. So verbs that end in a bia, I think they've got a different rule for how they're conjugated. However, it's not like put, put, well, that one, for some reason, there's no putted, or go, went, just all those sorts of irregular verbs that you have to, in that respect, English is just, vastly harder than Korean. Right. But in so many other respects, Korean's brutally hard too. So they're just, for either one who tries to learn the other's language, I have nothing but respect. It's hard.
Were you able to take with 10 Magazine any sort of examples from Korean language magazines about goings-on? I mean, did you look to those as examples of how a publication about Seoul and other cities can be made?
No, I haven't really. Korean language magazines are it's a unique market here, in that the magazines are made so much more for the advertisers than for the readers.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so it's a very skewed market, and in fact, Korea has the lowest per-page rate in Asia. Burma is more expensive than Korea.
Really?
When it comes to the cost of a page in a magazine. So it's a really weird market, and it's very competitive, as are so many things in Korea. People tend to compete on the easiest thing to compete on, which is price. And the Korean consumers tend to just buy whatever's cheapest. So to compete on service and offering a higher level of magazine and things like that, it's a really tough market to do that. So
but you're not selling to Koreans. You're selling to foreigners.
Well, I sure would like to sell to Koreans, but Koreans don't buy on the scale that foreigners buy at all. So at this point, I'm not exactly sure, but I think about 70% of our advertisers are foreign-owned businesses, foreign-run businesses, and then about 20 to 30% are Koreans and Korean-owned businesses. So it's a tougher market, and that's something that is a difficulty I didn't expect when I first got into this. But it's been interesting.
When I talk to people who put out magazines, they often say, yeah, there's the difficulties of the magazine publication itself, but it does, in this day and age with the internet, give them an opportunity to have not just a magazine, but a sort of brand where a whole world of content can be made, put out through the net. I mean, what kind of things do you want to do under the 10 banner that's not just in the magazine? Do you have those kinds of plans as well? Like, maybe you think about doing X, Y, or Z through different types of media on the net or what have you. I mean, extending magazines into other, whether it's real-life events or whether it's internet videos or what have you, is now so much in the conversation. Is that something you think about?
Right now I'm trying to adopt that old Steve Jobs saying where he said, I'm as proud of the things I don't do as I am of the things that I did. Yes. So I think right now I'm really trying to focus on improving our services and our sales in the magazine, and maybe at some point when the time is right, I would like to expand into more things, but right now I just want to focus on having the best content out there, the most information about Korea, the most interesting things to do. I was ecstatic with we're sitting here looking at our Dongdaemun cover.
Yes.
And Dongdaemun is a massive market complex in Korea, and I think we have what we put out that month. That was our March cover story, and that was one of the best articles about Dongdaemun and all the many things you could do there that I've ever seen. So, I just want
that before going to Dongdaemun myself. I haven't been there yet.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, you're gonna have fun.
I've been here a week and it'll change.
Oh, you're gonna have fun.
I will.
Yeah, it's a blast. It's a blast. And pay attention to the restaurants in the back here too.
Oh, I'm looking for eateries at all times. Food ends up being the main way I find my way into a city. Is that the same with you?
Yeah, I mean, and I'm a huge fan of Anthony Bourdain and all of his shows where he goes from place to place experiencing the food and experiencing the culture through the food and with the food, right?
And it's especially important here in Korea, isn't it? If you don't know the food, you almost don't have a way in sometimes. The food is so central in Korean society, right?
Well, yeah, but I wonder if it's... I mean, I haven't lived or traveled as much as I'd like to, lived in as many places as I'd like to, but I assume that pretty much everywhere the food is quite central to the lifestyle. But it certainly is here.
And the way Koreans eat together, I mean, it seems so important. Correct me if I'm wrong, but if you can't join the group for eating, you're kind of in social trouble.
Yes, that's right, and that's why so many foreigners in Korea are ex-vegetarians.
Ex-vegetarian. Yeah.
You come over and you say, "Yeah, I'm a vegetarian," or "I don't eat this," or "and I don't eat that," and before long you're just eating it, because when Koreans are picking a restaurant, they don't pick a restaurant and then pick the food. They pick the food and then pick the restaurant.
Right.
Hey, what are we gonna have? Let's go have dak galbi. Oh, okay, let's have galbi. Let's have whatever. Then they go look for a restaurant that serves that food. That's the general tendency. Of course, there's exceptions to that. But when you and a bunch of Korean friends are going, "Hey, where should we eat?" You pick the food, then go look for a place that serves that food in general.
Right. Any foreigner looking for things to do in Korea will want to check out 10. But what are your favorite types of things to do in Korea? Just you personally, when you're looking over an issue of 10, seeing what's going on, what's really like, oh yeah, I want to do that. What types of events are for you where the real action is in Korea?
Yeah, like I said, markets. I love going to markets.
It is the most visually and in every sense stimulating type of place to go, isn't it?
And some of the most. I mean, and that's Koreans at the markets that have existed for centuries. Most of them. They're living life very similar to how they were living it 20 years ago when I first got here, or 100 years ago,
It's a bit of a time machine, huh?
Dongdaemun has existed as a market for centuries. So when you go and you get to do some shopping and then try some of the food, and I mean that's that's experiencing the culture as purely as you can, in my mind.
Finally, do you still ever think about that idea you once had of learning Korean, mastering it, going to a new language, new place? Do you still think someday there's another language I might start on?
Yeah, I'd be interested in learning Chinese.
Oh, yes? Why? Just because China's so important these days, or you've always thought about China as a place as well?
I don't know. I think I've practiced a little bit. I've studied a little bit. I enjoy the tonality of it. I think I could do pretty well at it. I'd like to, Chinese, Japanese, either one. I'd love to just jump to one of these other countries and spend a year or two doing it, but who knows if I'll ever get that opportunity. We'll see.
With the grammar and such, you're not that far from knowing Japanese already, with the grammatical similarities. But Chinese, it seems, do you think it's harder than Korean? And for you, do you think it would be harder?
Well, but as I understand it, and from what I've seen, the word order in Chinese is closer to English.
Right, that's true. So you have that advantage.
So, and then a lot of the words, the Mali Jangsong is the Great Wall in Korean, and I forget what it is in Chinese, but it's something like Mali Jangsong. And
Yeah.
so you've got that.
Yeah.
You've got that similarity in the original Chinese characters for so many of the words that the combination of my knowledge of English and my knowledge of Korean would probably help me with either one of those languages should I decide to try to learn it.
In any case, you'll have an advantage, and I'm sure you'll enjoy learning whatever you do. I've been speaking here with Stephen Revere. He is the publisher of 10 Magazine, the CEO of 10 Media. He has also been... He was probably one of the most recognizable Korean teachers if you're looking for Korean teaching materials on the internet, from his books, from Let's Speak Korean Arirang, and probably from elsewhere too you've encountered him if you've looked for Korean learning materials online. Stephen, thanks so much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure, Colin.
This has been Notebook on Cities and Culture here in Itaewon, Seoul, Korea. I've been Colin Marshall. You can keep up with the cultural creators, internationalists, and observers of the urban scene on the show at colinmarshall.org. Thanks. And special thanks to all the backers of Notebook on Cities and Culture's Korea tour on Kickstarter. Adam Hartzell, Aidan Nullman, Alfred Lee, Andy Cooney, Angus Gordon, Bala Chenupati, Cam Smith, Chin Music Press, Dan Caraselli, Danny, Deborah Smith, Emmett Farragher, Umberto Grant, Ian Plosker, Ismail Kennedy, Jackie Gast, Jay Chang, Jeffrey Davis, James DeVito, Jonathan Filbert, Josh Paget, Kimberly Hahn, Manveer, Mark Hines, Matthew Workman, Maureen Kincaid Speller, Monica Eck, Michael Fransky, MJ Pritchett, Patrick O'Flaherty, Patrick Park, Piers Rippey, Robert Salzberg, Samuel Hansen, Sean Brown, Themistocles Crucis, Thomas Unterberger, Timothy Dobbs, and Wayne Wright.